Well, joining us on the program tonight, we have with us two former senior diplomats, Ambassador K.C. Singh and Ambassador Hardeep Puri joining us. Jyoti Malhotra, senior consulting editor of the Indian Express, and will be joined shortly by Musharraf Zaidi from Pakistan and Sambit Patra of the BJP. Ambassador Puri, to you first. Do you believe that India really had no option but to go to the International Court of Justice in this case? Do you think at the end of the day it's a smart move?
Well, I can certainly agree that it's a mature and a very well-considered decision. Whether we had other options and whether we are exercising other options is not for me to comment on. All I can say is that we have utilized a legal provision in the Vienna Convention relating to consular access, and considering that we had made 16 attempts to seek that kind of access, which was denied, we clearly saw an opportunity here, and I believe that what we have done is very well considered. And also I must add that this does not in any way dilute the reservation we've entered on the issue of the jurisdiction of the ICJ in overall terms. So if we can get relief through this, and I'm expecting that that will be provided, then I think it is a smart move.
Well, Ambassador K.C. Singh, do you believe that this would have been a decision that India would have really agonized over? Today also the MEA said that it was something that was very carefully considered, and at the end of the day, given that an Indian national's life is at stake, it was decided that India would go ahead. Do you believe it would have been something that would have been very, very thought through, and what the implications of this then could be?
Well, I don't know what they went through, but it's, I think, legally an appropriate move. Because as Mr. Puri is explaining, there are two different things. International Court of Justice jurisdiction is voluntary. Basically, you can't compulsorily take us there for any dispute. But this is not a dispute, any dispute on a bilateral matter. This is in respect of a convention. And there's a huge list which is attached, which is there in the protocol, which is a number of conventions which tantamount to international law, where hundreds of countries, 150, 180 countries have signed there. There the protocol comes in. So where the consular convention is involved, only for that specific purpose of interpretation of a clause in the convention, where Pakistan is not abiding by their commitments under the convention, that we've gone to the court. And there's a very interesting case of 2001 before the International Court of Justice, where Germany took US to the court because their two kids, German kids, who were brought up in America, they were caught in an armed robbery and murder case, and US went ahead and sentenced them to death. And they never gave any access to the Germans. The Germans went to then the International Court, and in the meanwhile, the Americans killed one of them and executed the sentence. But the court said Americans were wrong. Germany had a right, they were their citizens. One is right to access, and second is the right to provide them legal and other help. And therefore we have a case. And why do you think? I think it's clever because Pakistan is worried. Because if they have abducted Yadav from Iran, and today it's very interesting that the Iranians have also raised it for the first time, have raised it with Pakistan because of the relationship between the two countries going downhill, that if we get access to Yadav, and he tells us where he's been abducted from, that destroys the Pakistan case. So, it goes at the root of the case, and that is what Pakistan's worried about.
Well, we have Musharraf Zaidi joining us from Pakistan as well this evening. And Musharraf, you wrote a piece I just saw a little while earlier where you've been very dismissive about India's decision to go to the ICJ. You've said that it reeks of desperation. Can you tell us why? Because, obviously India would be desperate, to use that word, to save the life of its own citizens. So why not use whatever legal means are there at your disposal?
Well, of course, India is free to do that, and if Yadav was an ordinary citizen, and this was a conversation about an ordinary citizen and his or her rights having been violated and not being offered consular access or due legal process, it would be a separate conversation. But Yadav is not an ordinary citizen. We know for a fact that he is a serviceman. Ex or serving is cloudy, but we know that he was or has been with the Indian Navy. And the allegation in Pakistan is that he is a spy, and not just a spy, but an active agent, in charge of doing bad things in Pakistan. Now, this may seem ridiculous to Indian friends who are more prone to believe the story coming out of India than they are the story coming out of Pakistan. But I think Indian friends have to, at least to some degree, be cognizant of the fact that Pakistanis will believe more likely what is coming from within Pakistan. And the story here is that this was a spy who was carrying out and supporting terrorist activities against innocent Pakistanis. There's been a court-martial, and the argument, whether it's the Vienna Convention argument or any other instrument.
Musharraf, the problem with that is that, I'm not surprised that the narrative in Pakistan is different than the one in India. The problem with all of this has been the lack of transparency with which all of this has happened. I mean, there is a so-called court-martial that happens. India is not even told about it. We don't know when the trial began. India has not been given consular access all this time. India wanted to see the charge sheet, at least look at the documents in the case so that an appeal can be filed, which legally, even under your laws, he is allowed to do. But when there is this complete opaqueness about the matter, that raises a question. My question to you then is that, do you think Pakistan is going to, argue this case at the ICJ or just ignore it? Can it afford to choose to look the other way?
Well, so I wasn't aware of the case that KC Singh just mentioned about the U.S. and Germany, but again, the one big distinguishing factor between the citations, whether it's the instrument of the Vienna Convention or any other sort of instrument of dispute resolution that is being sought through the ICJ, I do feel that, and this is based on whatever little that I've been able to study since the story broke. I think partly because of your tweet yesterday, Nidhi, but there doesn't seem to be any way that one can imagine that Pakistan can be compelled to hand Yadav over. Now, this is not disputing the legality or the morality or the ethics of the case, but simply given that Pakistan has found this person, there is a videotape confession that was aired on national TV in Pakistan. There has been a court-martial. The series of events in Pakistan suggest that an ICJ ruling one way or the other, or a request for things to be held in abeyance until there's an ICJ ruling on this request that India has made, those requests may fall on deaf ears here in Pakistan.
Okay, that's very important what you're saying. I want to ask, Sambit, before I come to you and to Jyoti, Ambassador Hardeep Puri, you heard what Musharraf was saying, and that I think is that is the concern. What if Pakistan chooses to ignore India's request and the directives of the ICJ? Can it do that? And I mean, what are the implications if it just ignores it? What happens?
Well, I would be surprised if Pakistan chose to ignore the, a ruling by the ICJ. Every state has the option of either anchoring itself in the international system of the rule of law or saying that it does not believe in the rule of law. Now, in the case of Pakistan, there are some additional problems. The way I'm not looking at a Pakistani narrative or an Indian narrative. The simple issue here is consular access, and that consular access has to be granted. Now, this gentleman was abducted from a location in Iran, and we now have the Iranians asking for consular access to the same person. We have the same kind of criminal enterprise, and so, or at least so it seems to me, to be operating across the borders. So what we have here is not just the Kulbhushan Yadav case, but I believe, Nidhi, we are dealing with a much larger phenomena, and most of Pakistan's neighbors will have to come to terms with the fact that this is a state system which is not abiding by the rules of the system. And I'm not coming into issues relating to terrorism, but I'm talking about the rule of law per se. Now, if Pakistan chooses to not participate in the processes that the International Court of Justice has initiated, I hear from information in the public domain, I heard Harish Salve say that the next hearing will probably be on the 15th. Well, that is a choice that Pakistan has to exercise. But then Pakistan would, I'm sure, also have to factor in the implications and the kind of messages that it is sending around. If you deal with this on this basis, now I find the Pakistani position quite incomprehensible for the simple reason that I think granting of consular access is the least of the issues involved here. Now to
Okay, Ambassador Puri, just give me a second, because I just want to break down the various things you've said. I want to break down the various things you've said and come to Jyoti and Sambit on this. Sambit, the question I think that is also being asked today is that, you know, there's a reason India hasn't taken any dispute with Pakistan to the ICJ for decades. And this is since 1971, the first time that we have gone there. And therefore, is there a danger that we're opening ourselves up to problems in the future, especially on issues related to Kashmir?
Not at all. I believe every case is decided and discussed as per the merit of the case, and here we have an issue of human rights. And secondly, as Mr. Puri rightly pointed out, there are certain issues in the public domain, and we gather a lot of information from the issues on public domain. One such issue is that when India and Pakistan both signed for the ICJ in 1960, to be precise, then they had a caveat. The caveat was that none of these countries can be sued by the Commonwealth nations. That means India can sue Pakistan and the vice versa. But this particular case, if I am right, is moving under the Vienna Convention, which both India and Pakistan were signatories on 24th of April 1963. So naturally, these two should be seen with some amount of difference. That is a different issue. This is a different issue. But the bigger issue in this case is Pakistan is left with no other option but to show that it is committed towards justice as far as human rights is concerned, as far as chapter 36 of the Vienna Convention is concerned, because after all, the global eyes are watching it. It's not just India and Pakistan, everyone across is watching it. And remember, there are many loopholes as far as Mr. Kulbhushan Jadhav's case is concerned. It is not just consular access. Well, yes, the prime point legally is consular access, but the confusion in this whole case is quite humongous. Confusion number one, if you would see,
no, I know the history of the case, Sambit. You're saying what Ambassador Puri is also saying, which is that you know that ultimately Pakistan has to decide how it wants to be seen to the rest of the world in deciding in its response to this ICJ ruling. Jyoti, do you agree with that, or do you think the Pakistanis may just turn around and say that, you know, we're not going to comply? Having said that, it's been almost 24 hours since this news broke, and we haven't heard from the Pakistani Foreign Office at all today. We have, you know, heard vaguely from their defense minister, who says a lot of things. But it's interesting that the response has been, I think, overall a little more cautious than one expected.
I think Musharraf Zaidi indicated where this is heading, which is, as you say, that the Pakistanis are going to ignore the ICJ letter to the Prime Minister. Remember that the ICJ president has sent this letter and said that please hold off whatever you guys are doing until there is a verdict by the ICJ. So for the time being, they do have some breathing space. And I think if what Musharraf is saying is correct, is that they could ignore him, because they are saying, so on the one hand, it's they have time until the verdict, and on the other, they're saying that this is not a regular Vienna Convention matter where ordinary citizens are involved, because he's allegedly a spy and he's sort of a retired naval officer. This is what I gather from what Musharraf Zaidi is saying. I think Ambassador Hardeep Puri is also partially correct, which is that this is really a battle that is being fought in the court of public opinion. And in a sense, what the Indians are trying to do is to tell the world that, listen, this is an Indian citizen of ours, and he was kidnapped from a third country by the Pakistani intelligence agencies. Now, there is no proof, of course. At least in the public domain, there is no proof. I'm sure the Indian government has proof, and they must have shared this proof with the Iranians, which is why the Iranians are saying what they're saying. But having said that, there is this battle that's being fought in the public domain not only between India and Pakistan, but also internationally. But I think the more important point is, which is what you referred to, is that since 1971, when India went to the ICJ because if you remember that there was a hijacking, an Indian Airlines hijacking to Lahore, and we went to the ICJ, and actually the ICJ threw out that matter. Now, the Indian government can argue that this is a different case because this is a case of the Vienna Convention. But I think having gone to the ICJ, you're also, in a sense, you've put your foot into this door of third-party intervention.